Hey everybody, this is Deji.
And Chris.
Welcome to the Lot 1 podcast. On today's episode, we talk with Adam Howard about VFX, AI, Titanic, Star Wars, Birdman, and so much more. Lock in for this one. It's going to be great. Hey everybody, welcome to the Lot 1 podcast. On today's episode, we have Adam Howard, who is a VFX supervisor for a lot of shows that you probably know about. Definitely know about. Thank you so much for coming on our show today, Adam.
My pleasure. It's nice to see you guys.
For the people at home and for me, I just want to know, is there anything you haven't worked on? Because I feel like you've worked on so many things that we've seen.
It is kind of ridiculous. I made a graphic recently that I put up on LinkedIn and Facebook and other places on my website with all the logos of the shows that I've worked on over the last 45 years. And it's kind of nutty. But yeah, I've worked on a lot of shows. There's actually plenty of shows that I have not worked on, but there's a lot that I have.
So for the audience at home, do you mind starting at the beginning? How did you get started in the industry?
I did a graphic design degree in Australia. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. And my dream was to work in film and television doing what was called special effects in those days. Because there were no computers anywhere, in anything. It was crazy. Certainly not in anything to do with film or television. And so I did my graphic design course, and I did a work experience thing at ABC Television in Melbourne, the Australian Broadcasting Company. Actually, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And I was there for about a month doing that work experience and loved it so much and knew that that is absolutely what I wanted to do. And so I made little signs that went on everybody's desks, and I would go there every Friday at the end of each week and just go and see everybody and hang out and kind of annoy everybody until it got to the point where the art director, Bruno, just said, just give him a job. So I got a job, which was great. But I was hand making all the graphics. If we were doing something like the news and you've got the news anchor sitting there in the box over their shoulder with the picture of what they're talking about, all of those graphics were handmade. So if it was like Reagan and Gorbachev in a conference, we would have to go to Time magazine or Life magazine or whatever and find really good color photos and then cut them out with a scalpel and airbrush shadows on Pantone paper and rub down lettrisette text. And it was all very, very physical hand-on work. But about a few months into the job, Bruno Liepen, who was the art director there, and the head of the graphics department, called me in and he said, look, you know that big box that's sitting in the corner? It's been there for a week or so. They say it's a computer that does graphics. And we just rolled around laughing. Because the only things that we had seen were CAD systems for architecture, and they were very primitive wireframe stuff and nothing like what we needed to do the kind of work that we were doing. And so he said, look, you have the least program commitments of anybody, so put it together with engineering, play with it, see what you think, and let me know. They had already started putting it together, and I jumped on, and I used to play piano. And as soon as I sat down at this thing, it was the first thing that had a pen and tablet, but the tablet was about 3 feet wide and weighed about as much as my car. And the pen was made out of steel, and the cable that attached it to the tablet was made out of steel, and it was all very heavy and unwieldy. But I touched the pen to the tablet, and being used to like reading music, looking up here, but playing down here, it was the same kind of feeling. And so I just connected to it instantly. I was animating on it within minutes.
Wow.
And so I went back to Bruno the next morning and I said to him, look, I'm going to say something really important to you. And you don't need to listen to me because I'm the youngest one in the department. I'm 17. I've got the least amount of experience of anybody in this department. But this is the next major industrial revolution staring us in the face. Just like the steam engine revolutionized industry, this is going to revolutionize this entire planet. And at some point, one day, somewhere down the track, there's going to be something like this in everything we do. So we've got to get on this right now. Otherwise, we're all going to be dinosaurs. And he went, you just think it's a cool thing because it's a newfangled computer. And I said, look, yes, to an extent. But also, I just want to show you what this thing is capable of doing. And so I showed him, and this was at about 7:30 in the morning, and he was just flabbergasted by what was capable of being doing. One of the main things was that you could upload a photograph. Like you could on a downshooter, you could do a frame grab of a photograph, and then you could draw a mask on it and cut it out, and then you could save it and you could use it again, which was just something that we had never been able to do. So I showed him, and he was just floored. And he said, "Okay, look, let me think about this, and I'll go talk to the powers that be, and who knows what'll happen." So he went off, and we started our day, and we were doing all the graphics for the news that day. And we'd work 12 hours. There were about 8 of us working on the news, and we'd work 12 hours and maybe get 8 graphics made in that time, because the amount of research time and building time was huge. And the news went to air at 7 p.m. And at 5 to 7, Bruno came in and just whacked me in the back of the head and said, "Okay, it's done." And I said, "What's done?" And he said, "We bought it." And I'd completely forgotten about it, honestly, because I just thought it was never going to happen. And I said, "Bought what?" And he said, "We've bought Paintbox." And it was the Quantel Paintbox. And he said, "You're the only one who knows how to operate it, so you're running the department." And so, there were other artists there who were on it as well that I helped train and teach them how to use it. But it was such an intuitive tool. And so we did that. And then when we just started making graphics, we went from making maybe 8 graphics a day between the 8 of us to making 50 graphics a day between 2 of us. Wow. In about a month. It just revolutionized the entire pipeline. And then we, I unfortunately for everybody out there, I am one of the people responsible for naming conventions, because, they're kind of the bane of everybody's life, but they came about through necessity, because we had no way of knowing where anything was stored on the computer, because we didn't think about naming things. It was a picture of Gorbachev. Okay, well, there's Gorbachev. And but then you'd have to type it in, and there was no instant access to images like we have these days. When you go into the library, it would display 12 images. And to get one image was like scan. Next image. You'd wait for that for 12, and then you realize that you were 5 pages down before you got to your graphic. And so it was very stressful. So we started naming things and having some organization that really helped us. Anyway, so I was at ABC for about 4 or 5 years. One of the things that I started doing was animating, 2D animating, because that was all that 3D didn't exist at this point. 2D animating main title sequences for some of the comedy series at the ABC and some of the music series as well. And we did the first digitally animated main title sequence in the Southern Hemisphere, which was very exciting. And then there was a music program called Rock Arena, and I designed and animated the main title for that as well. But that was actually animated in 3D, and we did it at a company called Sonic Vision in Melbourne on a Cray XMP supercomputer. And the Bosch FGS 4000 3D animation system that they used was tied up on another project, so we couldn't get on it immediately. But the day after that project finished, we started ours. The previous project was the Dire Straits music video, Money for Nothing. And so, our thing had a very similar kind of look to Money for Nothing, because it was using the same hardware and software. Anyway, so that was my time at ABC. And then I left ABC and I went to a company called AAV, that's Armstrong Audiovisual, biggest post-production company in the Southern Hemisphere, also based in Melbourne. And I was visual effects supervisor, director, animator, compositor, everything. And then in 1990, I came to the States. Came to the States with a total pipe dream, which was, I think back to it now, and I think very cocky and kind of an impossible dream. But I wanted to work on Star Wars, and I wanted to work on Star Trek: The Next Generation, because it was the highest rated TV series in the world at that point. And I wanted to work on MacGyver, the original series of MacGyver. And within 7 months of being in the States, I was lead animator on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
So cool.
And then in that first year, we got nominated for 2 Emmy Awards, which just blew my mind. The 2 that are sitting up on top up there.
Yeah.
And we won them both in the same night, which was incredible. About a year and a half later, I became the lead animator on MacGyver. Star Wars wasn't going to happen because George had already made the 3 films, and there was no talk about any other films. He knew there were going to be other movies, but no one else did. And then about 10 years later, I got a call from ILM saying, "Can you come up and help us on Master and Commander?" So we just have like a 4-week gig for you to do. And so I went up to ILM and Industrial Light and Magic, which is the company that George Lucas started to do the visual effects for Star Wars. And they were very happy with the work on Master and Commander, and the director on that, Peter Weir, who was another Australian, told them they had to hire me full time. And so Jim Morris, the general manager, he did. He hired me, and I was there for about 4.5, 5 years, and did 17 movies in that time, including Star Wars. So I got to do the 3 pipe dream thing.
Nice.
That's so cool, man.
That's
I was
really
literally
awesome.
just sitting there and I was like, wow, there's so many like film historical things that you took
Yeah.
part in, like the dawn of the computer graphics and animation, and then jumping to Star Trek, which had like huge leaps and bounds in visual
Mhm.
effects, and then you went to ILM, which is like, especially back then, was the visual effects place that you would this is the only place you could go to, right, at that level. Now we have like Weta and stuff like that, but it's like, it's just crazy. That's awesome. What a
And, in
insane career.
between, there was so much other stuff too. I mean,
Of
Star
course,
Trek
yeah.
was really good. I worked on Next Generation, but then I was on Deep Space Nine and Voyager and Enterprise, and I was visual effects supervisor on Star Trek First Contact, and I was a consultant on Star Trek Insurrection. So Star Trek was very good to me. I got 9 nominations for the Emmy Awards, and I won 4, which was just mind-blowing. But lots of other shows along the way, and shows that you wouldn't expect to have visual effects in them. Things like Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and The Simpsons.
Mm.
If you look at the main title sequences of The Simpsons, there's a shot in that main title sequence when the camera flies through the classroom window and Bart runs into the classroom and he writes a thing on the chalkboard, and it's a different thing each week. And that handwriting is my handwriting.
So cool.
I got to write about 300 of those, I think, because we
Wow.
would do 9 a week, and then they would pick the one that they felt was the funniest one at the 11th hour, and then toss the other 8. But it was always up to the writers who picked the funniest one, except for one. And I saw the original list of 9 that came in, and they said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "It has to be this one." And the line was, "Coffee is not for kids." And they said, "Well, it's not even really a funny line. We were thinking of not even putting it on the list." And I said, no, it's not about the line. It's about how it's written. And so the chalkboard starts perfectly written, and then a little less perfectly written. And then by the end, he's like, there's a complete scroll across the bottom of the screen. And they saw that and they all laughed hard. And they said, "Okay, yeah, you're right. That's the one we're using."
That is funny. So you were one of the first digital artists on the planet. What did it even look like back then?
Honestly, not much different from the way it looks now. The clients were the same. They had the same demands. The schedules were tight. The budgets were tight. The only thing that's happened is that all those things have become tighter. But the work style and the way you dealt with clients was the same, basically. Now we have a lot more technology to choose from, and I hear people when new things come up in the business, there's always this kind of underlying nervousness from everybody about, oh, it's going to kill our jobs, it's going to take over everything. AI being the current one that is doing that. And I always say to people, this is one of the advantages of age, just having a bit of wisdom. It's just another tool in the tool belt. And our tool belt has expanded exponentially over the years, going from simple 2D compositing on Paintbox, and then on Quantel Harry and Quantel Henry, and then going to Flame and Inferno and all these incredible systems, and then Nuke was really an incredible thing to watch happen. The process just became more streamlined. Compositing on Harry, for example, doing something on Star Trek Next Generation, you had to be super organized because you would composite layers one on top of the other. But once you comped it, you were committed to it. You couldn't go back in like you can now and say, well, I just don't like that. I'm just going to slide that one out and replace it with this. That didn't exist. It was a hard comp. And so if you had a comp that was 2, 3, 4, 500 layers deep, you had to go back to the beginning and redo it again if something needed to be changed. And so, I remember being so grateful for the whole kind of adjustable timeline thing when we were doing Titanic. And I was doing the big face replacement shot of Jack and Rose running down the corridor with the water chasing them down the corridor. Jim Cameron wanted changes and adjustments made, and then that was 240 frames of hand painted faces that were incredibly complex to pull off at the time. And really, somebody said on another podcast recently that there is no reason why that shot should ever have worked, because the technology just wouldn't really have allowed you. But he said, Adam made it happen. The backstory to that was when they had the shot, they had gone to ILM, and ILM said, look, this shot's impossible with these elements, so no, we're not going to take that on. And then they took it to Digital Domain that Jim owned, and they told him the same thing. And then they came to me, and I was at POP Film in Santa Monica, and I looked at it and I went, well, I guess it's possible. It's only time and money, and if you've got the money, I'll make the time. And they went back and they told him that he's got the job. That's the right answer. But that was 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2.5 months to do that one shot. If it had been old school, not being able to slide in and change layers, it never would have been finished. So we have seen incredible advancements, and I love that. But the fundamental process of compositing shots and doing animation and all that, it's all still the same.
It's crazy that like you brought up like another podcast was like, oh, you shouldn't have been able to do this back then. But it's like those things that you guys were able to pull off when you shouldn't have been able to, I'm using air quotes for those who aren't watching, shouldn't have been able to do it back then, are the reason why we're where we are at today with visual effects. You kept pushing the bar, which kept causing new tools to come out. It's like, oh, here's a problem, how do we fix this? Oh, here's this new tool. Thunk,
well, that shot was actually pivotal in changing the color corrector in Flame, because Flame at that point was owned by Discrete Logic, and I got to the point where literally every single parameter on every single node was changing on every single frame, and it just choked up the machine and it stopped. And I talked to the producer and I said, I don't know what to do, because the machine's not working and we've tried everything and we can't get it to work. And they said, well, you don't have a choice because this has to be done and Jim needs it. And so I called and talked to the guys up there, and they said, well, it's impossible. The color corrector is incredibly versatile and it can't possibly be broken. And I said, well, it is. So please come and look. So they flew down from, I think, Montreal, and I opened up the timeline and their faces just went. And I went, yeah, it's one of those. And they then did some digging and they went, oh yeah, you killed the color corrector.
You broke it.
So then they went away, and within a week they had completely rewritten the whole like fundamental core of the thing, and that became the basis of the new color corrector that was in Flame for a very long time. So yeah, I think one of the things that I've always said to crews when I'm working with them is, for us, it's our job. It's what we do every day. But you never know what you're doing. You never know if what you're doing is going to be like a pivotal moment for something in the history of film. Because all we are at the end of the day is kind of extreme problem solvers. And as the supervisor, the buck stops right there. The director comes to you and says, how are we going to do this? And you've got to have an answer. Doesn't always have to be the right answer or the final one that's going to be done, but you have to have an answer. And so we spend a lot of time working out how to solve problems, and then those things end up, as you say, just helping develop new software and new hardware and new techniques. And I think sometimes that, back in the early days of ABC for me, back in the early 80s, none of us realized that every time we put pen to tablet, we were setting the groundwork for a brand new business. That has now become what the visual effects business is worldwide.
Which is huge. Crazy. Number one, I didn't even know that anybody had to retouch the faces in this water scene. So I'm just saying, I didn't even know that. So and I just pulled it up and rewatched it right now. Yeah.
The backstory to that story was that it's obviously not Kate and Leo running down the corridor,
Right.
because it was too. People say, "What's the visual effect?" and they go, "Well, it's the water." No, the water's real. It was a dump tank that was dumping like 100,000 gallons of water into that tank. And the cool thing, Jim Cameron was the camera operator, and he's in a wetsuit, and the camera was on a bungee cord going up through a hole in the ceiling, and he slammed himself up against the wall, and as the water hit him, he just let go of the camera, and the bungee sucked it up, and the camera guys upset the camera. But on the first take, the stunt guy who was doubling for Leo was running behind Sarah, who was doubling for Kate, and he ran around, and it's all in slow motion, and you saw his foot hit the ground, and his foot just slid out from underneath him, and his face went down, and the walls were made out of steel. They're supposed to be wooden walls, but they were made out of steel to be able to hold the pressure of the water, and he just went whack, unconscious, and then you see scuba divers running in and jumping into the water and pulling him out. So take 2, new stunt guy.
Oh my!
And so I had to take their faces off and replace them with Kate and Leo's faces. And
wow,
Jim had them run down the corridor, but no one really thought about it that technically, to think that when the lights were flicking on and off, which happened in set, that they should happen at the same time. And so when I was making faces, trying to take the take of like Kate running down the corridor by herself and taking her face and putting it onto Sarah's face, Sarah would have the lights on, Kate would have the lights off, and none of it matched, and none of the jiggle in the skin or the hair worked. And so I ended up just painting the faces completely and tracking them in.
Wow.
Just as a little aside, my favorite part about doing that show was that I was doing it at a POP film in Santa Monica. It was a company owned by Alan Kozlowski, and we had made a rule that no one was allowed in the room for the duration of the time that I was doing the shot, because it was just intense concentration. The only person who was allowed in was Alan. And so one day I was working on it, and when you're working on a shot and you're just kind of working and somebody talking behind you and you kind of go, yeah, whatever. And he stuck his head in the door and he said, "Look, I've got somebody here that I think you would like to meet. Do you mind if we come in?" I said, "Yeah, it's fine. Come on." And I just kept on working. And when you're sitting there and you haven't really paid full attention, but you realize that you should pay attention over there, not here. And so I sat back in my chair and I put the pen down and I turned around and there was a guy sitting next to me, and it was George Harrison from the Beatles.
Wow.
That's crazy.
George and Alan were old friends, and George is a filmmaker, and he was the guy who actually ended up financing all of the Monty Python films when no one else would. And he was fascinated by pen tablet technology like we were using on Inferno at that point. And so I started talking to him about that, and I said, "Well, would you like to have a go?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great." And he said, "Just get me a clean frame and I'll just draw something." And I went, "Oh, no. And I said, I can't believe I'm going to say this to you because you're you, but not a chance in hell. I'm not stopping what I'm doing just because you're here. If you're going to try this, you're going to work on this shot." And so frame 150 of that shot, there's a little highlight in the center of Kate Winslet's forehead, which is a reflection of water on a droplet of water, and it's painted by George Harrison.
That's so cool. The Lot 1 podcast is brought to you by the Tourist Hat Coffee Company. You know what keeps me running on those long film sets, Stagey?
What's that, Chris?
Coffee. And you know what's the worst thing ever?
A swift kick in the pants.
No, bad coffee. So that's why I choose Tourist Hat Coffee Company's high quality coffee beans. Their artisan roasted single origin coffee and handcrafted blends are so much better than those stale stuff you get from those other brands.
Yeah, those things are bad.
Tourist Hat Coffee Company's coffee is artisan roasted, micro roasted, single origin, and their small batch roaster that handcrafts their blends to maximize peak freshness upon delivery. Family owned and operated. What more could you ask for from a coffee company, Deji?
I literally can't think of anything else.
If you're still not sold, a portion of each purchase goes towards contributing to some of their favorite nonprofit organizations, such as Animation Dance Community, Seeds of Hope International, and Beautiful Gate Orphanage.
These guys are good.
Make Tourist Hat Coffee Company your new go-to quality coffee choice with our exclusive offer for you, the Lot 1 podcast listener.
Oh, listen up, guys.
First-time customers can use the code LOT1BOGO at checkout to receive 1 free bag of coffee when you buy 2. That's right, Deji, buy 2, get 1 free.
Whoa.
So head on over to touristhatcoffeecompany.com and use promo code LOT1BOGO at checkout. Again, that is LOT1 BOGO at checkout. Whether you work in the film industry or not and want a delicious cup of coffee, this is the perfect time to stock up on your favorite blends of coffee or try something new. I know I'll be brewing Tourist Hat on my sets moving forward, Deji. Again, that's promo code LOT1 BOGO, LOT1 BOGO at checkout to claim your buy 2, get 1 free. Terms and conditions apply. Tourist Hat, coffee that fuels your adventure. Just for the sake of the audience, for those who may not know exactly, what does a VFX supervisor do specifically? Like, what would you classify as the job description?
Good question. So, a script gets written, a director gets brought on, the director has a whole vision of what he wants the film to look like, but then it comes to a scene like we're going to land a space shuttle on an asteroid and the guys are going to get out and drive around. We're going to do that. And so the visual effects supervisor comes in and we break down the script into what all the visual effects elements are. And then we work with the director and the cinematographer and the producers and everybody else just to work out the most efficient way of creating that shot, the most cost-effective way of doing it, but at the same time delivering the biggest bang for the buck in the shot itself. And so my job is to work not only with the production crew, but then also work with like the hands-on crew to make sure that what we shoot is absolutely perfect and make sure that what we shoot is shot the right way so that when we go into post-production, and I'm leading the whole post-production army of people on that, I know that what we have shot in production is going to be of good use to them. And I think as a compositor and an animator, I am able to bring a lot of good advice to productions because I know what doesn't work. I know what can really, make a shot a nightmare for compositors and animators. And so I try not to have those things come up at all. But yeah, our job is to just really streamline the whole process and design the shots. On Rush Hour 3, I was working with John Bruno. We were both supervisors on the film. And so Rush Hour 3 with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. And we have a huge sword fight sequence on the Eiffel Tower.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to Paris. Yeah, we went to Paris and we shot in Paris for a month and shot on the Eiffel Tower every night. And that was incredible. But then there were things that we just could not do on the real tower. Either, this is also one of the definitions of visual effects. But what is a visual effect? Well, a visual effect is something that is either too dangerous or too expensive or physically impossible to do in front of a camera. So then you have to resort to animation or matte paintings or miniatures or puppetry or makeup effects or stunts or whatever, or a combination of all of the above. And so, in that fight sequence, we ended up coming back to Culver City and we were shooting at MGM and we built a small section of the Eiffel Tower on a huge green screen stage and shot all the surrounding stuff. And when we were in Paris for that show, I had bought a book that was a book of the original blueprints of the Eiffel Tower. I bought 2 copies. I got one for me and I got one for ILM. And because ILM were doing those shots for us. And I think we had 21 visual effects houses working on that film, but ILM was doing the Eiffel Tower sequence. And they said, so what are we going to do? And I said, you're going to build an Eiffel Tower, but you're going to build it from the original blueprints because we have to match it up exactly to shots that we shot on the real tower. Yeah. And so they literally built it bolt by bolt from the original blueprints. And that 3D model is probably the best model of the Eiffel Tower that's ever been built. Because it's exact.
Wow. That's crazy.
Super cool.
I have a question. So what is like a day in the life of a visual effects supervisor, when you get, or maybe let's walk through when you get on a project for the first time and sort of what do you do in the beginning and then during the work? 'Cause it's hopefully, you're usually brought on before, like in pre-production, right? And then
usually not always. Not always. I worked on Birdman, and
Mm-hmm.
the whole single camera, single shot
Yeah.
thing, which I think was something like 1,800 separate shots that Chivo, the DP, shot,
Whoa.
and then we stitched them all together. But Chivo and I worked together to just make sure that all. I got brought into that early on in production, but they were actually shooting, and they decided to bring me into Soup and replace the person who had been doing it first. And that's always a challenge when you get brought in the middle of a show.
Yeah.
Happened a few times, and then you just deal with it. The best way to go is to be brought in pre-production. So the very first thing is you read the script, and then you panic because how am I going to do this? But then you sit back and you think, okay, well, we're going to do this that way and that way, and then it all starts kind of falling into place in your head. Then there are many meetings that happen in pre-production with the entire team. One of the things that I don't think people really understand much about the way films are made is that it is such an incredibly collaborative effort. I'm always in in-depth conversation with the stunt team and the makeup team and the wardrobe team, because in many cases we're all relying on each other to be able to do our elements of that one shot.
Wow.
So that's pre-production. In production, there's a lot of this.
For those just listening, he just put his arms together and gave this weird.
Yeah, you just wait. You wait a long time. And unfortunately, visual effects, in many cases, visual effects ends up being the stuff that's always shot at the end of the day. And then they go, and we don't have time to get all this stuff done, so we're just not going to do it. But given the fact that that's the way that happens, once they say, okay, we're doing this shot next, you have to have everything ready and prepared, and you've got like data wranglers and everybody on your team ready to just jump the second that they say go. And so organization on the production end is huge. Having a really great visual effects producer is essential. I have always been of the mindset that I've trained to be a supervisor my whole life, and I'm really good at that. I'm not a producer. I've never made myself out to be one, because there are people who spent their entire lives just training to be that. And so I always bring in really good ones. I had two wonderful producers, Robin Griffin and Nancy St. John, who I did many movies with together, and unfortunately both of them died last year. And so that was kind of devastating, because they were part of the family and part of the team. But you get through production, and then the funny thing on production is that on the final day, on wrap day of production, everybody's like hugging each other and going, "Oh, this is great, we're finished, it's fantastic, and now we're going to go off and have a vacation." And I'm looking at it going, and I've got another 10 months of work to go. And then everybody comes back together for the premiere, and they're like, "Oh, you've done 2 more movies since then, but we're still."
What's the scariest script that you've got, like, that you got in your hands, and what is, like, can you think back to the one script that scared you the most on your first read, that you were like, I don't know how we're gonna do this?
I don't know if anything's ever really scared me completely, but Birdman was very challenging. It was an incredibly ambitious thing to try and pull off, and we did. And fortunately, most people don't even know that there are stitches in the shots.
Yeah, when you said 1,800, that was just crazy.
Yeah, there's an enormous amount of planning that went into that. So, for example, I got a call on a Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles, and they said, "Can you be in New York on Monday?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." And so I was supposed to have a couple of days to be able to meet everybody and get kind of settled, and then go and start shooting. And I arrived at the airport, and the driver said, "Yeah, change of plans. We're going straight to the theater," because we were shooting at the St. James Theater in Manhattan and down in Broadway. And so I had literally just read the script on the plane, and so we got there, and the director said, "So, okay, so we got this shot. How would you do this?" And he described it, and I thought, well, we should probably preview this, because it's going to be a very complex kind of lineup, and we want to make sure everything works. I had not had a chance to talk to anybody yet at this point, especially not even Chivo, the DP. And so I'm just going through by the seat of my pants, trying to work something out. And he said, and how long is all that going to take? And I said, well, it might take up to a week to just turn that around just to get it. And he goes, well, that's not going to happen because we're shooting this in 20 minutes. And I said, okay. So this is when the experience comes in. And I said, so do we have a stunt team? And he said, yes. Are they here? Yes. Do they have a descender rig? Yes. Okay. Do we have a grips department that's fully stocked and ready to go? Yes. Get them all in the room right now. And so we came up with this idea of building a Trojan horse that the camera could descend into, because the shot starts up on the roof of the theater and then goes through a little door and down a spiral staircase that has 3 turns in it. Even though the spiral staircase only has 1 quarter turn, we turned it into 3 full turns.
Wow.
And then follows Emma Stone and Ed Norton out into the perms above the theater. They start making out on a table and the camera goes over the top of them and then out into midair and then drops down, and you see the theater stage out there, and the camera drops and then starts moving once it gets down to the bottom of the stage and moves right out through backstage, out into the stage and right up to Michael Keaton's face. And so we designed this rig that had the camera on 2 cables from the descender rig from the stunt department, that they were letting out this cable so that Chivo and I could puppeteer the camera, and he was holding one side and I was holding the other side, and we puppeteered that out, and then we let it out over the edge of the stage perms, and then the stunt guys dropped the camera and it landed in this little nest in the Trojan horse. The special effects guys did a charge that broke the cables, and then the grips just pushed this huge thing out and up into Keaton's face. And we only did 2 takes, and I think the first take is the one in the movie.
Jeez, that's crazy.
Wow. That's insane. I mean, I think that really speaks to like the knowledge that you have of every aspect of filmmaking, and how you've talked to so many different departments and know what a descender rig is, and that's incredible. They're able to come in and solve that problem right away.
One thing that I said to crews always. Yeah, one of the things I've said to crews always is, this is a visual thing, so for those of you who are listening, it doesn't really operate, but say you've got a yard-long ruler, and the very beginning of that ruler is the first day of pre-production, and the very other end of the ruler is the premiere of the movie. Everything in between that is the entire process of making the film. Right in the middle, there's this tiny little block, and that's your room. And you've got to know everything about what happens in your bit, because that's what they're relying on you for. But you also have to know everything that comes before it and everything that comes after it, so that you can tell the people who are making the stuff that comes before you what to do so that you don't get screwed and can't do your job. And then you've got to know everything that happens after it leaves you so that you don't do the same thing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just really, you don't need to know how to do it, but you need to know why it's there and what it is and why it's important. Really important to understand the whole process.
Wow.
Yeah. What do you feel like, people who are new to, VFX sort of miss, or they don't get right away?
I think one of the things that I see a lot is people who want to be at the top straight away. People who come out of film school and they want to be the visual effects supervisor straight away. And that's good. It's commendable that they want to do that. But it's also extremely dangerous. What people don't realize is that if you get on a set and you have a title which says you have experience and you have knowledge, but you do not, you're going to get eaten alive. And so I say to people, it may not be the one thing you want to do, but start at the bottom. Get in at the ground level in the most junior position you can and learn that junior position, and then go up to the next one and do that, and then go to the next one and do that. And at some point along the line, you may find that one of those stages is something that you actually love doing, and you'll do that for the rest of your life. Others of you will keep on going until you get to the thing that you really wanted to do, and then you may do that, or you may realize, I didn't like that at all. I don't want to do that at all. And you'll do something else. But learn all the steps and be humble, because it's a brutal business. It's a vicious business, and it can be absolutely magnificent and wonderful as well. But you've got to have a very tough skin. And I've got this coffee cup here that has this thing written on it that just says, anything is possible. I've got two cups. One says anything is possible, and the other one says never give up. And that's I think the most important thing you can tell anybody ever, which is I was on an interview recently, and I said to somebody, never listen to the naysayers, because the people who say you can't are the people who didn't. And so, you never give up. You keep on going, and people will continually tell you shouldn't be doing it, or you can't do it, or it's never going to happen, or it's never going to work, and it's a pipe dream, and it's ridiculous. And I know that coming from Australia as a kid that no one knew from a bar of soap, with a pipe dream of working on 3 of the biggest productions in the world, I did it on all 3 of them. So if I can do it, anybody can.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
Speaking of your 3 pipe dreams, so you worked on Star Wars. That's pretty awesome. Some might say I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I'm here to ask some questions. What did you do? I mean, it was episode 3, right? You worked on Revenge of the Sith. Okay. What did you do? How was the experience? Did it ruin Star Wars for you? Did it not?
I was working in what was known as, funnily enough, the Saber department at ILM. And Saber was just ILM's name for Inferno. It had a few plugins and things that were specific to ILM, but fundamentally we were operating Inferno. And the great thing about that department was that every single person in the department, there were only, I think, 12 of us in that department. We had all come from working in commercials and episodic television, where you had insanely ridiculous deadlines that just, you had this much time to do this much work, and it had to be absolutely perfect, and it had to be perfect the first time. So there was zero room for error. And, I did music videos for Michael Jackson and worked closely with Michael Jackson doing that. And that, knowing that we're working right now, but in 6 hours' time, this is going to the world on MTV. That was Remember the Time.
Yeah.
So you have zero room for error. And I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
Yeah, what did you do? You're in the Saber department.
So what did we do? Yeah, so we're in the Saber department, and so we ended up getting a lot of the shots that were kind of having difficulty in other departments, and I got to design all the holograms in the thing. So anytime Yoda appeared as a hologram, I was doing all those things. I actually am one of the holograms at one point. Late in the movie, there's a shot of Emperor Palpatine, a hologram of him from behind on top of a war table. And I went to composite the shot, and there was no element of Palpatine. And I went to production, and I said, so where are these elements? And they started looking, and they went, we didn't shoot it. We didn't shoot it. So I said, well, do we have the costume? And they said, actually, yeah, it all just arrived from Sydney today. And I said, so, okay, somebody find the costume and get it to me. And so a couple of hours later, the costume arrived in my room, and Sam Edwards, who was one of the guys who I was working with, had a little handy cam. And we said, right, let's get out in the parking lot. And there was a picnic table, and the side of the building was kind of white. And so I got in the costume, and I stood there, and I just did a little bit of motion that was required for the shot. And Sam shot it handheld with his handy cam. And then we loaded it up into the system, and I made it a hologram, and it's in the movie.
Wait, so you're the Emperor is what you're saying?
I'm Emperor Palpatine, yeah. And then there's another shot where Padme is telling Anakin that she's pregnant. She's telling him that for the first time. And they're in that huge hallway with the red carpet and the big column. And there's a tight shot over his shoulder looking straight at her as she's telling him this. And George had shot it 3 times, and when they got into editorial, he decided, well, I want to use her from one take and Hayden from the other one, and then his hand comes up in the shot and holds her face, but I want to use the hand from the third take. And so we started lining them all up, and her face in the hand take, her face was just enough back that when the hand came in, it just disappeared behind where the face actually was in that one. And we weren't allowed to realign the shot. I wasn't allowed to move the hand. It had to stay exactly where it was. And so I went to John Knoll and I said, so this is a bit of an issue. We don't have a hand. And he said, I've got this camera, and it's like a 12 megapixel camera. You want to borrow it? And so I borrowed his still camera, and I got a little piece of green screen, and I was driving a Jeep at the time, and I went out into the parking lot, and I positioned the Jeep so that it was in the position to match the lighting of the shot, and I duct taped the green screen to the back of my Jeep, and hand holding this thing in motor drive, and I printed out frames of the thing so I could see the hand in the right position, and then I was just moving my hand in motor drive, taking all these photos. And then same thing, we went in and we picked the appropriate images and loaded it into the system. And so as the hand comes in, it's my hand and Hayden's thumb that goes behind her face. And then when it comes out, it's all Hayden's hand.
That's hilarious.
Wow. That's crazy.
So funny.
It's crazy to think about that too.
Yeah, you were doing all the shots then that people struggled were struck. So you were the problem solving department essentially.
We were a problem solving department, and that's actually how I joined the company, because they were working on Master and Commander, and there was a shot that Peter Weir had shot on the deck of the ship, and when they shot it, it was midday in Mexico on a very bright sunny day, and he decided that he wanted to change it to 5 o'clock in the morning in deep fog. And the problem with a ship deck is that it's covered in brass, and the brass is all highly specular reflections, and the wood is specular reflections, and they were having difficulty trying to work out how to resolve that. And Pablo Hellman, who was supervising the film for ILM, said to them at the point where they realized that they had kind of exhausted everything that they could think of, he said, I only know this because he told me this, but he said, you got to call in the big gun. And they said, what does that mean? And he goes, there's this guy in LA, give him a call, see if he'll come up and help. And I'm sure he can probably work this out. And so I got the call, and I had just finished working on Seabiscuit at Sony, and I was driving off the Sony lot, and ILM called, and they said, look, can you be here on Monday? Said, absolutely, I'll be there. So went up and I solved the problem in the first night, and I just did it as this major. One of my tool chest things that I used to use as a compositor was that I would use the color corrector as a compositing tool, and I would completely break shots, like color correct them to the point where they were completely ruined, and then I would take elements out of that, almost like taking separate color layers in Technicolor and combining them to create an image. And I did that with those shots and just recomposited it, and it worked perfectly.
It's actually really smart.
So that's when Peter Weir said to Jim Morris, just give this guy a full-time job.
That's so sick.
Yeah, we were very much the problem solvers, and that department still is at ILM. Those guys have an incredible breadth of knowledge, men and women who work in that department. They're all amazing artists, and we had a lot of fun, but we solved very, very big problems, and we did it quickly because that was the job.
That's super cool. I noticed when I was looking through your website, I was looking at your photos. I noticed you have a photo of you sitting in the D Theater at ILM, the infamous D Theater.
Yeah.
Where, for the audience members that don't know, do you want to explain what that is and how cool that is to say you've done
ILM had two theaters. They had D Theater, which was the big theater, which was a beautiful theater, which tragically is no more. It's all gone away. But in D build, so there were multiple buildings on the ILM lot up in San Rafael in California. C building was the main building that had, the C stage where so many incredible bits of movies were shot. The theater was there, but then D building had this tiny little theater that was known as D Theater, and D Theater only held about 25 people. Really grungy. You could almost still smell the pizza and beer like in the carpet. It was just, it had been there since Raiders of the Lost Ark and Empire Strikes Back and all those things, and all those films. We would do dailies in that room, and so you go into this room, and I remember walking in there on one film, and I'm looking around the room, and some of these artists are people who I had idolized for years. But then the supervisors are sitting there, and Dennis Murin's there, and John Knoll is there, and you're just all sitting there just talking about shots. But yeah, that photo of me in D Theater was taken the day of the big sale when they were selling off a lot of the furniture before we moved down to the Presidio. And I just wanted to have one last photo inside D Theater because it was just a very special place.
Yeah, there's a lot of BTS that I've seen since I've been a kid about Star Wars of Lucas in there, talking about the movies and the shots and so I was like, whoa, that's really cool. I know what that is. That is history. You're on holy ground right there.
It is
Which I
holy
thought was
ground,
super
yeah.
cool. Yeah, it was really cool. Man, that's awesome. I mean, you literally like ILM was so groundbreaking, so to be there is just crazy. I'm kind of fanboying a little bit.
It was a lifetime dream for me to work at ILM. I never thought that it would actually happen because many times over the years, ILM would call me and they would say, look, can you come up and work on this project? And I would already be on something else and I couldn't leave. But it was just lucky timing that as I finished Seabiscuit, they called and they said, can you be, and it was a Friday night, can you be here Monday? Absolutely. And I went and I packed my bags and I drove up to San Francisco, and my uncle lived in Petaluma, about 40 minutes north. And so I stayed with him and then went down the next day and started work. And that was supposed to be a 4-week gig, and it ended up being nearly 5 years and 17 movies. And I was just very blessed that in the middle of that, Star Wars happened. And so,
yeah, that's super cool.
That's really awesome. So you did talk a little bit about, AI, and this is sort of like, I feel like a hot button topic, in sweeping the industry right now in a lot of ways. But you did say that it was a tool. So how do you view AI and what's going to be happening in the next, 5 to 10 years in film and specifically in, VFX?
Look, everything that we use is a tool, whether it's, I'll sideline just for a second, tell you a story because it's about tools. Richard Williams, who was the animation supervisor on Roger Rabbit, had worked on some of the biggest animated projects ever, and he was doing a lecture somewhere in Los Angeles. And shortly after Roger Rabbit came out, and he was taking questions, and this young guy said to him, So, Mr. Williams, I want to know what the software was that you used to create this animation. And he went, it may not be the right number, but it was something like this. He said, oh, it's 2B. And the kid started furiously writing notes down, and he goes, 2B. What was that? Who makes that software? And he goes, no, it's a 2B pencil. He said, we hand drew everything. So everything we use is a tool, and I think it's very easy for people to get freaked out by new tools. Look, when digital first came in, everybody was completely freaked out. I had people say to me, digital will never take over from film opticals. Film opticals is state of the art. Digital is just a flash in the pan. Well, that was proven to be wrong. AI it's one of those exponential jumps in the business where, a lot of the business changes that we see are very small, incremental changes that have big effects, but there's small things. AI is a huge one. And I think one of the misconceptions of AI is that AI is the answer to everything and that anybody can make a movie with AI. The reality is that AI is a very complex tool that requires some pretty skilled prompts to go in there. And there are very, very talented people who are working very, very, very hard to make those things look seamless, but they're not. I think ultimately what will happen with AI is that AI will be accepted into the fold as part of the tool set, and as it should be, and will be used wisely by people rather than just saying, well, it's going to replace everything. Because, getting back to an earlier question of yours of what does a supervisor do? One of the most important things that a supervisor can do for a director and for a producer is to sometimes say, this should not be a visual effects shot. Because, I had an example of a movie I did with Liam Neeson called Unknown that we shot in Berlin. And there was a scene in that where the Hotel Adelon has to blow up. And the director was thinking at the time that it should all be a CG shot. And I said, well, no. I mean, if you want to save money, let's just build a miniature and blow it up. Because once you call cut, it's done. And so a beautiful miniature was built in London, and they blew it up. And I had done a photo mock-up The hotel has the Hotel Adelon at the top, and I did a photo mock-up of where I thought that sign would kind of end up once the explosion happened, and they built the miniature, they blew it up, and when we lined up the two images of the miniature aftermath and my original thing, it was pretty much exactly where I said it was going to fall.
Wow.
But the beauty of using miniatures as one example is that nature has a wonderful ability to throw in things that you would never think of. Physics has a wonderful ability to do things that you would sometimes never consider because it's incorrect, but it looks really cool. And so, to try and come up with all the things that happen naturally in physics and naturally in nature would take a very, very long time for an animator to animate and a compositor to composite. And sometimes when you shoot it, it just happens. And the same thing's going to happen with AI. I mean, AI is a brilliantly powerful tool, and it's going to find its place in the business. And I think it's going to settle down, and it's going to be just another very powerful thing that we use to create movie magic, because that's why we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not the first person that I've heard talk about that, of how as long as we use it as a tool in the right way, because that's all tools should be used in the right ways. Their personal example was they had shot something that wasn't wide enough. When they got into post, they realized, man, it's not having the same effect if it's, we're closer. We couldn't, the space we were shooting in wasn't large enough. We can see everything else in the room. So they're like, what if we just use it? They were saying a giant trash pile. What if we just used it to extend the outside of that as a set extension? So they used AI to build it, because that would have taken, a bunch of hours, and they actually had someone like do it in Blender, and it didn't turn out like the best thing in the world. So they were like, that's how they utilized that tool. It saved them, I don't even know, because I'm not a visual effects person, but hours and hours and hours of work doing it. And they were able to then composite it into the image and made it be a better image of more what the director wanted. It was a tool that they used to save time and money, which I think is the key thing. Production's getting so expensive. We need to find ways to speed it up in the proper ethical ways, and tools are the way we do that. So
yeah, tools are the way we do it, and wise decisions by everybody throughout the process.
Absolutely.
I think an example of that, like that, is a very good one of extending shots where you want to make something wider, as an example. AI is so perfect for that. And AI is perfect for crowd replication and beauty fixes and all kinds of stuff. It's going to become a big part of the tool set of matte painters. I'm sure it already is in many cases. But that's one of the other things too, that people talk about AI as if it's just something that just arrived. AI has been around for a long time, and
we've had different names.
Had it. Yeah, we've had it in our tool set for a very long time. It's just been different things. And people hear one thing and they get hooked into that one thing. But the reality is that all these things have been around for a very long time, and we just keep on using them and keep on absorbing them into the technique and using them the best way we can to create the best images we can.
Yeah, wow. I've got a lot more questions, but we're out of time. Before we get into Chris's special question at the very end, Chris, I want you to show him a card.
Okay, so I was doing some more digging on your website. I was going to say this till after the podcast, because I was like, man, we ain't got no time. We could talk about this for hours. So I noticed that you are actually a honorary member of the 501st Legion.
Yes, I am.
I am a member of the 501st Legion.
Well done.
And here's my badge to prove it.
Well done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an active member anymore because life has become very busy, and trying to make it in this film industry has consumed my life, unfortunately. But I still have my costumes.
What is your costume?
So I have a Stormtrooper, a New Hope Stormtrooper. It is the highest accuracy you can get to being screen accurate. And then I have a officer's uniform, specifically from A New Hope. I have the black one. He's, what's the rank? Commander. He just commands stormtroopers. He's the guy that Darth Vader talks to, the first officer he talks to on Princess Leia's ship. I have the black one. And then I was building a Kylo Ren for the longest time. I still have the helmet. I still have all the material. I just never finished it. And then my dad, I do it with my dad. My dad was a stormtrooper. and then he turned Count Dooku because he looks like Count Dooku, so he's
Nice.
Count Dooku. And then he did an AT-AT Commander. He recently sold that one, and now he builds droids. So he currently has a chopper, which is from the Rebels animated series, and he's working on a Rex droid, which is for those who don't know, is the droid in Star Tours, the original droid in Star Tours that would pilot the ships. So it's like
do you know who voiced that?
No, actually I don't.
Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman.
Wow.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm sure my dad knows that fact. For a second there I went, wait a second. Okay, he's original Rex, not like newer stuff, because I know that well, I guess Rex it's Star Wars. Oga's Cantina. I forget. I'm totally butchering this right now. I just know that like he was also building the Dio droid, which is from the Rise of Skywalker movie, which is like the one that's like a little wheel with a little triangle head or whatever.
Yeah.
Ran into some design problems to where he can't finish it at the moment, but that one was voiced by J.J. Abrams.
Right.
Remember that one?
Yeah, but Paul was a friend of ours, and he was such a lovely guy, and sad that he's gone now.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was fantastic. But that's very cool.
Yeah.
My badge and my plaque, I don't have them anywhere here. They're in the house somewhere. I don't know where. It was presented to me by Peter Mayhew.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. So he was great. He came up and he stood next to me, and he looked down at me. He goes, you're kind of short for a stormtrooper. Thanks, Peter. Love you too.
Love it. That's so cool.
Okay, so then let's one of you lay your question on him.
So, if you had one piece of advice, something short and sweet, simple, one piece of advice for anyone wanting to be a VFX supervisor, what would that one piece of advice be?
Never give up. Never, ever give up. Because so long as you believe that you can do it, you can. And you will. But if you listen to all the people who say that you can't, then that's the kiss of death. Just never give up. Keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. And what this business can bring you is some of the greatest joys in the world. So yeah, never give up.
Love
awesome.
It.
That's great.
Perfect. Print.
Said, how can people, connect with you? Do you have like an Instagram, or should they go to your website?
I'm Adam Howard _ I'm Instagram. I'm Adam Howard _ official. I've got a website, which is adamhoward.art, A-R-T, where I paint portraits. And if you haven't seen them, go to the website and have a look. I painted a lot of celebrity portraits, mainly because people know exactly what the celebrities look like. And so when they see it and they go, oh, wow, that's Liam Neeson or that's Steven Spielberg. Well, if I'm going to commission you to paint my auntie, Uncle Charlie, I guess it's going to look like Uncle Charlie. So, yeah, in fact, I just finished one just this week that I did for Chris Tucker from Rush Hour, because Chris gave us tickets to his show, which was great. And so I just finished this one.
That's so cool. If you're listening, you have to go look on the video podcast. That
really
looks
cool.
Really cool. Or go to his website.
That's awesome.
adamhoward.art. And I'm available for commission. So if people are interested, hit me up.
Hey,
yeah, definitely do it.
Yeah.
I'm looking right now at them, and there are some incredible work here. Really incredible. Thank you so much for coming on our show and just, getting into the weeds with everything that you've sort of like learned and acquired, and all the movies, the countless memorable, fantastic movies you worked on. It's been a real pleasure for me, for sure.
Yes, Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure for me too. So I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to hearing the final podcast.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye.
Right, see ya. Bye.
And that's a wrap for today's Lot 1 podcast episode. Thank you so much to our guest, Adam Howard. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Huge thanks to our producer, Mina Vazarian. You rock, dude! And shout out to today's sponsor, Tourist Hat Coffee Company. Make sure to check us out on Instagram and TikTok at the Lot 1 Podcast. That is the LOT1 Podcast. And also check us out at lot1productions.com to see all the fun stuff we got going on. All right, today's film lingo is crafty, which is the snacks that you have on set, sometimes called craft services. and the origin is actually from servicing the craft. So that's why you get craft services. Anyways, see you next week.
One take wonder.
Yep. That's why they pay me the big bucks.
Wait, you're getting paid?